Welcome, everybody. This is Next Vista for Learning, and we are doing our Fascinating Folks series, and we are really excited to bring some folks to you who are going to tell us about an interesting app that they have developed, and then we're going to have a little conversation about it. Nextvista.org is a free video library of creative takes on educational topics, stories of communities and service to others, help for those learning English, interviews about careers, and loads of recordings with advice for teachers. Our mission is to highlight creative approaches to teaching and learning through our projects and contests, and we hope you'll take an interest. The Fascinating Folks, Educators, Engaging Edupreneurs project is one designed to foster creative and productive conversations between educators and entrepreneurs in the learning sector, and we welcome your feedback on how to make this as interesting and inspiring as possible. So with that, I would like to hand it over to Craig Nugent, who is part of the three-man team who will be telling us about the Daily Edit. Craig, I put the mic in your face. Go.
Thank you very much, Rushton, and thanks for having us on. It's good to be here. As Rushton said, my name's Craig, and with me I have Michel de Jong and Stephen Pegueraro, and we are the Daily Edit. Hello. So we are a little bit, a little bit different. We're not your standard tech entrepreneurs. We're three pilots. We currently live in Hong Kong. We've been based here for a number of years. And we came up with an idea about a year ago to, how would you say, improve the media landscape. We were reading media, as we all were, and looking at it through a lens of a consumer, and seeing how the world was sort of being manipulated and pushed left or pushed right by certain organizations. And we sort of discovered that one of the reasons that this is happening is how media outlets report on certain stories and what they don't say about a certain story, the bits that they leave out. And that became the key driver behind what we're doing. So that's basically what we're doing. I'll just allow Mish now to introduce himself briefly, and then on to Steve, who can run through the slides.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Michel de Jong, originally from Holland. As Craig said, been in Hong Kong for about 10 years as a pilot with Cathay. Joined the team right from the start. Super excited to be here and learn more from you guys on how we can hopefully help the education sector and bring media literacy to the various age groups. So yeah, just really excited to hear you guys' thoughts on what we've created later on.
And hi everyone, I'm Steve Pegueraro. Craig and Mish have done a good job introducing. I'm originally from Melbourne, Australia, and like Mish, I've also been in Hong Kong working for Cathay Pacific for the last 10 years. My background prior to that was mostly in technology and physics. I studied astrophysics, and that sort of led to a lot of these ideas and things going on. And together with Craig and Mish, we kind of found that we complement each other perfectly, and that's where this idea really grew. So I'm really, looking forward to getting any feedback from all of you, especially because we're all pilots, the three of us, and none of us are educators. So any information we can get would be amazing. So if you like, I'll start the presentation now. It's quite short. We've set this up so it's more of a conversation. But I'll share my screen now. I'll just make sure everybody can see it. Can everybody see this?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so we are the Daily Edit, and our tagline there, as you see, is more to the story. That just alludes to what Craig said about how we pretty quickly discovered that most of the manipulation that goes on in news media centers around omissions, what they're not saying. So we make tools to enhance news literacy. That's our purpose. We've seen everywhere, like everybody else, this divide that's been growing between people, or at least the perception of a divide. And we started to look into why this was happening. And no matter what, we kept coming back to the fact that people don't have the tools, the internal detector to see through the things that they're reading. So we're making tools to help them deal with that, to empower them. Our purpose is to bring people together with better information and more accountability. will bridge the divide. And we believe this can really happen. So what's the problem that we're seeing, that we're trying to solve here? These stats come from the Reuters Oxford Digital News Report and a study conducted by Pew Research. Between the two of them, there were over 80,000 respondents. It was conducted worldwide, but we focused on the US target initially. The first interesting stat, 79% of US readers say news orgs only favor one side when presenting the news on political and social issues. It's not very surprising, that one. I think we all know that. But it gets a bit more interesting in the next one. 65% of US adults can't correctly classify statements as either opinion or fact. The methodology for getting that number was very interesting. Basically, each survey respondent was presented with 10 different sentences. Some were opinion, some were fact. Most contained some form of logical fallacy. 65% couldn't differentiate between the opinion and fact statements. 74% of US readers say they want to read news from no particular viewpoint and make up their own minds, but that's actually very difficult in the current news media landscape. Everybody has an angle, everybody has an agenda. In summary, people want better news, but they don't understand it. So our solution, there are two parts to this. We've made a consumer-facing component and an educational component. So I'll show you the consumer one first. We have the Daily Edit app. It's a mobile app on both platforms and a web application. It does several things. The first one is we detect omissions in news articles. The way we do this is kind of interesting. Whenever a news story occurs, there can be several hundred articles from different organizations published about that story. We've developed a machine learning algorithm that identifies all the components of the story that go on. So who said what to whom, what events took place, historical summaries that some articles may contain, and so on. Every little piece that goes on. In a large story, for example, we can find up to 300 individual topics that occurred. We group these together and we call them aspects. And we do this at several levels so we can zoom in or out on the detail of the story. What it lets us do, though, is we can see which articles contained which aspects of the story. But more importantly, what didn't they contain? What did they omit? The idea here is that we're not making ourselves a source of truth on this. We're essentially crowdsourcing from all of those news articles, from all those organizations and their viewpoints, what happened in the story. If you've got people on the far left and people on the far right, if you gather everything together and aggregate it, you tend to get a pretty balanced view. That's what we do. While analyzing the articles, we also detect potentially misleading information and deliberate misinformation. These are things like logical fallacies, missing data references, the favorite one where an article will start with surveys have recently said, but they never tell you what survey or what study. Missing source references, which is a perfectly valid thing for a journalist to do, but the onus is on the reader to then make a judgment call whether they trust the journalist. We just highlight it and say, look, the source wasn't named, have a think about it. Things like ad hominem attacks, false dichotomies, we detect all these, but we're very careful to not add subjectivity. So for example, we don't include hyperbole as an annotation because one person's hyperbole is not another's. And again, we don't want to make ourselves the source of truth or debate in this. We're just making a tool to enhance it. The omissions for each article and the amount of manipulative text that was found are combined to generate a score for the article. We rank them. The idea being that the top article is the most informative and the least manipulative. And it basically goes from the best article to the worst. When a user reads an article and they get to the end and we show them the omissions, what was left out, we actually present these in order so that the next article they click on to see that extra information that was missing will give them exposure to the most new parts of the story, things they haven't seen yet. What we say is we take the reader on the shortest path to the most information. We've also built a reviewing tool for humans. This is the educational side of it. And frankly, we originally built this tool as part of a manual review process when we were sort of iterating on our idea and seeing if it would work. And then we quickly realized this had some significant value outside of the consumer space. With this tool, you can manually link aspects aspects within a story. You can find all those pieces yourself and connect them between articles. You can highlight the manipulative pieces of text yourself and say this was a false dichotomy, or this was an appeal to emotion, for example. And once you have completed the review, you can see the connections and the manipulation. This is what it looks like. So this was a story a couple of weeks ago when the recent climate change report was published. Hot topic, lots of different angles and viewpoints from different news organizations. What's interesting is when you go and annotate the aspects and find everything in there, and you come to the summary screen, you can very quickly see by highlighting one article, which aspects did it contain, which did it not contain. And you can move the cursor over all of them and see, okay, who left out what? And it can get really interesting looking at it in a summary view like this. You can really start to see the bias of each organization coming out. Within an article, we can actually review, when we review the article, we can highlight the manipulative pieces of text. In this example, it was a BBC article. I think actually it was The Guardian. The user has highlighted this phrase, according to a source familiar with the matter. Okay, this source isn't named, so we actually mark that as an unnamed source. There's no penalty to the article for this. Again, it's valid for a journalist to do this. It just then is presented to the reader as an alerting tool, you know, awaken the mind and start thinking about, do I trust this journalist or this organization? That's the gist of what we do. As I said, I thought I'd keep this presentation short. So once it jumps to the next screen, what I would like to do now basically is get any feedback we can. We think this reviewing tool could be very useful in an educational setting in a few different ways. But we want to get feedback from actual educators on what you think and what you think would actually work in that setting. Just to get the conversation started, some things that we have been thinking could work are using this to teach news literacy in high schools or in particular university courses where students might be able to review articles in a story and be graded on that. They could compare their performance against an educator or even against the machine, for example, and see how we go. Or vice versa, you know, a already reviewed story could be presented to the students as a way of showing all the little nuances of how some of these fallacies appear in the text. With our machine learning algorithm, we can't actually pick up everything. We can suggest some of them. So for example, a false dichotomy. In most cases of a real false dichotomy, the machine would need all of the knowledge in the world, which just, it doesn't work that way. So we simply suggest it that consider that this may be a false dichotomy when it occurs. But in a classroom environment, usually the person reviewing has that knowledge and can actually make a judgment call whether a false dichotomy has occurred. We think there's a lot of value there. So I'm just going to stop the presentation. There we are.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Steve. What I'm going to do next is, first of all, I want to invite our team that is here to toss questions your way, to just put in the chat, I have a question. And in doing so, I'll be able to recognize you. I'm also going to introduce the people that we have in the group so that those of you watching the recording can get a sense of the range that we have here. So looking across my screen, when I call your name, just please wave at the camera. Jesse in New York, Darren in Oregon, Lauren in California, Bela in California, Jarrell in California, Brett in California, Leah in Manitoba, and Sheila in New Hampshire. Thank you all for joining us as a part of this effort. I want to start with Darren, who has a question. And Darren, if you would also mention the book that you wrote, because I think it's important for our discussion.
Well, I have two. I have one that's fact versus fiction that I wrote in 2016. Well, 16 through 18 is when we wrote it. It's with a co-author, Jennifer Lagarde. And then I have another one, Developing Digital Detectives, that is coming out in about 6 days. And it's all it's very similar to what you guys are talking about. We're very concerned about started out as students managing mis, dis, and malinformation, but equally concerned about the adults as well. And anyway, book number one was why and how kind of thing, and then this next one was more about, okay, here are lesson plans and here's ways that you can do it in the classroom with kids. I know that was a much longer answer than you wanted. Sorry, Rushton. But what I'm curious about is one of the pieces that you drew out. First of all, I love what I saw. It looks really interesting. The algorithm drawing those things out for students. But one of the most difficult pieces that you brought up in that rooters is the opinion piece. And then it drew me down the line of satire, parody, sarcasm, like all those things that we struggle in a digital environment to, parse out. I'm curious how you like. Is that a piece of that, or how does the algorithm work when it comes to those things? Does that make sense?
So when we select articles to review, we're actually using what exists on other aggregators as our data source. They do a pretty decent job of filtering that out, but as you say, some satire pieces do make it through. What ends up happening is when we do the clustering, when we actually gather together all those aspects that are found, without going into the tech side of it, we basically compute a sentence similarity score. Sentences that have high satire, usually, nearly all the time, get filtered as outliers because they, in this vector space of sentences, they sit quite far from the other clusters. If there are several satire pieces that have some alignment, then they may actually come through as a cluster and be considered an aspect. We haven't actually seen it yet, but it is a definite concern, something that could occur. At the moment, we're riding on the fact that one, they usually get filtered, and two, because we're already gathering data from other aggregators, between them doing a good job of filtering plus our algorithm, we're getting by okay. But it is a real concern, and it's something that affected an organization. It was actually in New York. They're called Our News. They started up in 2017. They were putting a nutrition label on news articles. And they tried to use machine learning, but it went down a strange path. At first, they struggled with sites like The Onion. So you'd go to The Onion and it would tell you that this is like 0% satire and it's heavily, right-wing politics or something, right? But it didn't work for them. So they tried to crowdsource, and then they just got spammed to death, as is always the way with that type of crowdsourcing in something contentious. So the way we're doing it, we ride on the fact that when we aggregate news articles, they tend to block out a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I was excited about their nutrition thing as well. Like I thought it was great, and then I saw it implode. So I'm excited to see your version of it.
Excellent. Speaking of New York, Jesse, you have the next question.
Yeah, so I feel like I can ask questions for an hour about the technical side of this, because that, especially as a former coding teacher, I'm very fascinated by the algorithm. So I guess I'm just going to do a clarification question and then an actual question. My clarification question is, so if I'm hearing you correctly, basically you're selecting the news pieces that are in the app because you're doing all the work on the back end to make sure that you run the algorithm against them to make them available.
Yeah, that's correct. We basically pull up all the articles we can in a story, and then we actually track the story over time as well. So as new articles are added, we recompute the clusters and whatnot in the background.
Okay, so this kind of then goes into my next question, which was, have you looked at, and you guys spoke a little bit about the connection to news literacy, but this is more of like a business strategy question. So in terms of marketing this, have you looked at pairing it or aligning it with a media literacy curriculum or something like that as kind of an inroads into the K-12 space?
Yes. To answer the question, yes. We identified a few organisations a couple of months ago. One of them is newsliteracy.org. They're actually my draft box and my email account. We're just kind of, we're just continually talking. We want to be in the right place at the right time to be able to go to them and then actually offer them something. But we're getting to that point now. So yes, that is definitely one of our strategies. The idea for us is twofold. Is we think what we're doing is helping people generally, like be able to critically read news and come up with their own source of fact, rather than be pushed towards one. And because of who we are, 3 pilots we think is a great idea, and we've executed, and Steve's been amazing on the tech side and built this solution. To some people, we may be lacking some credibility in the news space, and the education space. So if we can offer, our service, the service that Steve just introduced to educators, and we can become affiliated with them, affiliated with us, then we think that's going to do a hell of a lot for our credibility piece going forward from a commercial point of view.
I think there's without a doubt a need in the space for this. I think the piece that I still wonder, even as I look at the numbers, and Steve was showing the numbers, and by the way, the 65% didn't shock me at all. And I'm glad you talked us through how that came up, because I was like, wait a minute, how do they know that? And so talking us through they couldn't identify opinion and fact is helped me understand that. But I guess the question I have is, yes, there is that number saying, 74% of people want kind of unbiased news, but then you see a lot. I even remember seeing something the other day where someone was confronted with, like, hey, look, the stuff you're posting on social media is not accurate. And they're like, well, how do you know the media checkers are not biased? And I think you've walked us through enough to see, look, you're not taking a stance. You're just basically pulling from what's out there and showing it.
Yeah, correct.
And I don't know how to put this politely.
Sorry, Mish.
I feel like there are places in I'm sure all over the world, but definitely in the United States, where what they really want is to have support for their viewpoint, even though they're saying they want it to be independent and unbiased, as long as it agrees with what they want it to say. So I guess that's a question I have in my head. It might not be a reality, but
Look, you're gonna have I mean, Mish is from Holland. Steve and I are both from Melbourne in Australia. Hong Kong is very international. We know people from all over Europe, the US, Canada, pick a country. We know someone from there between us. And this problem that we're talking about is universal. So it's not unique to America at all. So it is worldwide, and it's similar with different sort of flavorings wherever you go around the world. And so our solution can be scaled and sort of be pointed at any English-speaking country, and we can also support up to 64 languages. So hopefully, if it works, and our plan is to roll it out around the world. And
I think
to your point, we're calling it a tool to empower. So we're giving people something to sort of rest their hat on and say, hey, I know a little bit about this topic, and I know I can talk about this, and I know both sides, and I've made up my own decision. We're not the source of truth. I mean, the one thing I say to people is, how do you know what the truth is? And to answer that, it's like, well, if you have a breaking story on something and you've got half a dozen or a dozen news outlets reporting on it, they might all have the wrong information. So we don't know what the truth is, really, from a scientific point of view, in particular. But all we're doing is aggregating everything that's reported, and then we're giving it all to you in the shortest amount of hops between articles, and you can have the discussion with your friends at the bar or a party or at school, whatever.
Well, I love that the 26% of Americans were like, I don't want to make up my own mind through a bunch of other, just toss me what I want. All good though.
So, some people we're not going to be able to reach, and we're fine with that.
It takes a village. Jarrell, you are up.
Great, thank you. Thank you all it is, like, as already mentioned, this is a tool that is so necessary, especially in this world where information is coming from you in so many different ways, long articles and even short TikToks. And so because you're interested in getting to the educational field, I'm trying to understand what is the primary focus before I ask my follow-up question. Because I saw it in two ways. This is a potential curricular tool for educators to talk about digital literacy, understanding journalistic strategies, and really understand what bias looks like in news. I also see it as a potential for students to use it as their default research source, where if they want to start off with a secondary source, they can go right into it. And so I'm trying to figure out what is the key strategy to entering the education sector.
In a word, That's why we're here talking to you guys. we literally, this is the first conversation we've had with a group like yourselves. On top of that, I do have a friend who's a vice chancellor at a university in Melbourne called Swinburne. I'm not sure if you've heard of that organisation, but beyond that, this is the start of the conversation.
Great. No, thank you.
And sorry to interrupt, but the way that came about as well is obviously, you know, our product has been designed to be consumer facing, but whenever we went through the journey of how we got to where we got to today, people, whether it's, you know, a gentleman like Rushton or other individuals looked at us and said, you know what, this would be a great tool for education for the reasons that you just mentioned. And so we've kind of gone, okay, we're not from that background, so we wouldn't know how we would design this in the best format so that it would, you know, gain maximum efficiency and is applied in the right way. And that's when we got in touch with Rustin and said, well, it'd be great to speak to a group like yourself and find out, you know, what would that look like, and how, you know, how would you want that to be designed so that it would benefit your students in the best possible way.
Absolutely, and there is so much ease. I'm very interested as a past science teacher. That whole section about climate change was very intriguing, and I especially love the idea where you can click on an article and you can see what topics it addressed. And if I understood correctly, I could click on that particular topic and see any articles that might be referencing it.
Yes.
And that alone is a huge entry point for so many students who are needing to do research to say, hey, look at all these articles related to my topic of interest. I love to get into it. For my follow-up question, I recently saw on Twitter, and unfortunately I could not find the photo anymore, as Twitter usually works. One of the biggest news sites that is used in curriculum is, of course, Newsela. And I think Newsela had the two key perks of Newsela is that it's easy to adjust the articles based off literacy level, as well as, more importantly, it provides some of the some questions, quizzes, study guides, etc., to help reduce the workload for the teacher. They can assign the article of interest, and then they can add their own quiz questions, etc. If the strategy is to market to teachers, what are the ways that you've all have discussed as a marketing tool for, hey, this is how you can use this service in your classroom? Or is it more, here's a tool and they're kind of, you can figure out how this tool may fit?
I think it's more the latter, purely because we're not educators. So we've been told, and we do see that it is valuable, could be valuable for all the reasons you mentioned, like especially as a research piece, to find other articles under climate change, for example, that are talking about a particular aspect of that story, and then go deeper. Essentially it's a great time-saving device, great time-saving tool.
So Gerald,
does that answer you?
So, sorry, I was just going to come back to that. So one of the things that, you know, we would, for example, we'd be able to do is to empower the teacher to load up the articles themselves. As you referenced, Newsela, it could be different age groups, different difficulty levels, different annotations that would be made available. You know, the annotation group wouldn't be, you know, maybe 80 different annotations. It might be reduced to just 3 or 4 or 2, you know, where they start getting their head around, you know, what is an unnamed source, or what is a missing data reference, and why would they do that? And so, you know, I think this is, you know, maybe not today, but this would be a very interesting discussion to have in more detail. So, okay, what would the ideal product look like for the different age groups, and, you know, when would you start this, so that we would then be able to develop a tool to match the right sort of age groups and experience levels.
Absolutely.
That's always the key. Sorry, that's always the key with software projects as well. My background in programming, I've seen it done so many times where everybody goes and works hard and makes a piece of software that nobody likes or uses or is inefficient. And you really have to work with the people who are going to use it to build it. That's the only way to get it right, because the whole process is a whole bunch of unknown unknowns, and you have to explore it together and work out what's going to work. So working out the appropriate interface for the educator and for the students, and for students of different levels, as you say, you know, we might, I think it was Illinois recently added news literacy to the high school curriculum, right? And we might want to aim this at high school students as well, but that would likely require a different interface than what you present to, say, you know, a grad student. right? Something like that. That's part of why we want to have the conversation and work out really what are the needs of the educators and the students, because we're not, between the three of us, we're not experienced enough to know that.
So
it might just be we might end up just going to an organisation like newsliteracy.org, and they manage the whole process, and it becomes part of their suite of educational tools. Yeah, like I said, this is the first conversation we've had today here. Yeah. So
one of the comments that popped up in the chat is that it would be nice to see a tool that moves people in a direction of, at least here in the United States, of less US-centric news, US-centric views. Thanks, Sheila, for that comment. And on the heels of that, I'd like to hand the mic over to Leah, who is in Canada, to ask a question as well.
Hi, thanks for inviting me. So just a little bit of background. I am a technology coach or a technology integration specialist in K-12 schools here. So I did spend time teaching at early years, middle years, and high school levels, and now I work in classrooms helping teachers integrate tech. So a tool like yours would be something that if I knew about it and thought it was great, I would be, showing teachers how to use it and using it with students. So I would agree with the other voices that have spoke that we need tools like this to help, whether it's high school, university, or middle year students learn how to kind of determine what's reasonable and valid and what's missing. I was going to ask the same question about adjustable reading level, because that is a big stumbling block we find. News articles are often written at a level that is difficult, especially for our struggling readers. And I don't know, because Newsela that was mentioned earlier, it takes out information, which you might consider an omission. But do you have any ideas how you might handle that to make it more accessible while still doing that?
Without going into a lot of depth at the moment, but just off the top of my head, some ways we could do it are selecting articles that meet some criteria to begin with. I don't know what those criteria would be, whether it's a reading level or if there's a automated way to actually check that. We could only present a group of articles that meet these criteria, and then let them review those. Because then if we've reduced the pool of articles that we're analyzing initially, there won't be any omissions. The aspects of the story that we find will be confined to that group of articles. Another one could be, we may gather all the articles in a story and determine all the components and clusters, but we might decide based on some property of each of those clusters that we might want to leave that one out. Maybe it is a reading level thing. Maybe it's something to do with the content. There could be something, particularly, distasteful about the content, and we want to leave that out. There are a few different approaches, but again, that's what we want to work out, and they're the questions we have as well.
Would it be helpful to you to hear what some of the criteria are of tools that I found that really took off in education?
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's not so much a question, but I've been doing the support role for about 5 years now. So I see kind of what gets educators regularly using something. Something that makes our lives really easy is if whatever you go with for how it's being accessed, if it allows us to log in with a few different choices, either through most school divisions here have either Google or Microsoft accounts and that integrated sign-on, or the option of just an email. So many tools we end up avoiding because the terms of use state right in them that they're only for 13 and up or 18 and up. And then privacy compliance, all those things that I'm sure as developers you've thought about, those things can really inhibit uptake in schools. And then the tools that I've seen done really well usually provide some sort of training and support for teachers from people from the education field, whether it's people who have left the classroom or still there. Teachers also love the opportunity to become like a product ambassador in exchange for, say, a free license. Lots of products that have caught on have also started free and then introduced a licensing fee once we are all using it. And accessible on different devices. So I noticed you showed the app mock-up, but we find it's really successful if kids can get it from, say, their phone or a Chromebook or a laptop. So those are some of the things that I've noticed. And if you don't have them on your list, ISTE might be another organization worth partnering with the International Society of Technology Educators.
Wonderful material, Leah. Thank you. Thank you. Bela in Oakland,
thanks.
you've been very, very patient as well.
Good points, Leah. Yeah, I agree about just the usability from the licensing point of view. We've dropped so many things that were wonderful, but couldn't get through the bean counters who were controlling what we could use. Okay, and that wasn't my question at all. Most of my questions were more operational with the program, like you kind of explained a little bit of it, but why you picked just the United States. And it sounds like you lumped the whole United States together as one entity.
Yeah, so initially when building this, I mean, very resource constrained, quite frankly. It started as the three of us and still mostly the three of us. And the priority early on was the consumer facing app.
Lost you, Stephen.
Lost you, Steve.
Yeah.
So
So
when I'm back.
You're back.
yeah, you're back.
He's froze.
Sorry, my connection's a bit unstable at the moment. There are some renovation works in the building.
See, no worries. This is part of the world that we live in at the moment. But you were talking about how constraints related to resources, and so that was one of the reasons you focused on the United States to begin with.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the legal costs for us from a technical point of view, putting on another country or covering the whole world is simple, but the legal side of it's actually very expensive and difficult. And we've had to basically pick a target to start with. And the US is the most interesting for us because, for one, the market is very large. It is very polarized. But to top it off, the US has extremely good protections for freedom of speech and for the things that we're doing. So much so that even the UK and Australia don't do this. We would be at risk of, let's say what we do upsets a news organization with some political clout and they legislate or help get legislation in place that prevents us from operating. The US has, in your constitution, rules to prevent that, which no other country has. So it was a pragmatic choice, I'd say.
Yeah, one thing the US does not have is a national education policy with any teeth.
Yeah.
I mean, every district has its own idea of curriculum and what's appropriate and allowed. So it's
part of the challenges of working in this country for sure, and perhaps also part of the opportunity for a system that's built well enough to be flexible. Brent in Southern California, representing tertiary education. Thank you for being part of it today, Brent. I know you have a question.
I do, but I think Lauren was ahead of me. So let's.
Oh, my bad.
Lauren, let's have you go first.
Oh, Brent, thank you. That's kind of you. Hi, my name is Lauren. I'm a principal product manager at Epic Books for Kids. We are a digital book company that's used in 90% of elementary schools in the United States. As a product manager, I've owned the teacher product, which is the teacher-facing line. I've owned the consumer product, which is the paid upgrade piece. I've owned the growth funnel. I've owned a lot of different pieces of this product, and I've been in a lot of classrooms, understanding what it means to build for teachers and for students, and for the families. I would say, I'd be curious to know. I think we face a lot of the questions that have been asked here around reading levels for kids, content appropriateness. How do you kind of navigate that? I think we've also done a lot of thinking around the teacher-facing experience and how we kind of get adoption in the classroom. And Epic has successfully gone from essentially nothing to again 90% of elementary school classrooms. I would say that we are much younger, like Epic Books for Kids, we're between ages 5 and 12. So we're probably totally missing each other in terms of that spread. But in terms of, trying to build a product that, we think we can get teachers excited about, I think that there's probably things that, a conversation to be had there. I would be interested in, what are your goals for this product? And how do you define success? You know, kind of along the lines of what Jesse was referring to, like, do you have a monetary goal, or is it strictly a mission goal, or how, you know, like, where do you see this kind of going?
There are actually two parts to it. Frankly, our overriding goal in all of this is self-defeating. If we succeed in what we're trying to do, we won't be necessary anymore, right? But we know that the real world's messy and the likelihood of ever really truly achieving that is low. But if we aim at it, it's a start. We have a monetary goal as well, not personally. We need to get this functioning as a business, because the type of thing we're doing in the consumer space is going to draw, I'm thinking of the word. We're probably going to upset some organizations. Not everybody's going to like the fact that we're highlighting what they do. And we're probably, frankly, going to get sued for what we're doing at some point. And we need to make sure that as a business, we can survive through that. So the consumer side of it is monetized. That's, you know, we are doing it that way. We have a subscription model and everything in there. And that's sort of, I hope that answers the question. From the educational side, we're open, because we really do want to improve news literacy. That is our goal overall. The original idea of this, I think, was inspired by Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World book, where he talks about baloney detection kit. That is our overriding goal. But in the process of getting there, we do have to build a business around this.
And can I ask, is your business consumer? So who's paying the subscriptions? Is it the consumers, or is it the schools?
That's at the moment it's consumers. So we've got a freemium model. A user can download the app, use it for free. It's in a beta at the moment, so it's not actually on the store yet. They can use it for free, in which case it will be ad supported. We don't do the retargeting or anything, so it limits us a little bit. But the idea is to try and get them to pay for a subscription, which gives more features, no ads, the usual sort of freemium model around that. We don't have any plans, anything concrete with schools yet. That's part of this discussion. We don't know that space.
Yeah, just to re-emphasize, this is a very early discussion. We're just about to launch our closed beta testing for the app. The aim is to have it on the App Store, visible and available for download for the general consumer by we're aiming at November, December. I'm happy for November, but our marketing team are kind of saying probably December. So it's a very early chat, and the aim is, yes, to create a bit of buzz and some PR. We've got that all sort of lining up at the moment and ready to go. Hopefully October, November. And yeah, we want as many people as possible to download the app. And if they don't want to pay for the app, then we're going to show them ads like a traditional news aggregator. And yes, we do need to monetize. Our focus with the education sector is not to make a fortune out of it, but to facilitate it. It has to make sense from I suppose, a cost neutral perspective. But our goal is not to go and make it a lot of money, enough to buy a private jet from education. That's not the goal.
I would just put one more question in front of you, just as like a prompt for you to consider. I would be curious to what extent this is a question about journalism versus to what extent this is a question actually about social media biases, and social media algorithms. And if there's a use case there for your paying consumers, and even for teachers who care about kids on social media.
Yeah, that's probably more a tech question, Steve, isn't it, really?
Yeah, it is. So from the technical point of view, we do plan on covering social media in the future, but there are a lot of constraints that come with that. For example, dealing with news websites is quite simple. We can present things in a browser and inject content. It's all legal by copyright law to do so. With social media, it gets a little bit more interesting, because the user, we can't hook into the Facebook app or the Twitter app or the Instagram app. We can't even overlay on it with the way mobile devices work. It's all locked down. We can do it in a web browser on a computer. Somebody can install an extension and we can handle it there. But on a mobile device, we're extremely limited. So we're looking at options with that, what we can do, whether they are Facebook apps or whatnot, or parental controls even. But we haven't explored it yet. That is in our plans for the next 6 months.
Great insights.
That would be.
I'm sorry.
That would be
Go
ideal
ahead.
if we. No. I was just going to say it would be fantastic, if we as a collective were able to convince, the social media like Facebook to allow, a function like that in the parental guidance to install that on your child's phone, or have that turned on. They're not gonna like that, I guess, but it would be fantastic to be able to at least have that sort of protection to stop, children from getting, the wrong information. So yeah, there's a lot of, I think we have a really blue sky vision of where we'd like this to go and how we can really help people, and especially children as well. So yeah, they're all great questions actually.
Fantastic. So for our recording, I want to go to one more question. Lauren, thanks very much for the insights and questions. Sorry to miss you. Brent, if you would finish off our recording time with your question. Good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I apologize. I came in a little bit late, so I'm kind of piecing together a couple things that I missed. I had my own meeting at the moment, but so just a little background for me. I am a professor at the community college level in the California community college systems. If you're not aware, that's the largest educational system in America. And so what I teach is academic writing for English language learners. And so I specifically cover this topic in some of my courses. We do individual units that deals with like media literacy and, understanding what's going on. And so this is very interesting to me. We currently use Newsela and a smaller program called News for You Online, which both of these do kind of these tiered reading type of things, which are really useful for language learners because they can move up and down and they can kind of figure out what's going on with it. So I just want to echo the ideas that other people have presented here, that might be a valuable way for a valuable thing moving forward, because I think it's not only a question of literacy skills for like K-12, but also for higher ed. We do see that there are large swaths of students who need to have tiered reading options to be able to go up and down or to be able to isolate language points or something like that. I guess, I know that this is very early conversation, so but just kind of telling you, I'm also department chair and also chair of the online education committee, which makes all the decisions for our technology purchases on our campus. And so when we look at things like this, we have a tendency to kind of figure out, well, what's going on with our pricing? How is this going to be a big support for our students? Or is this going to be like a small thing that some teachers will use and some will not? I'll tell you just honestly, like I like Newsela. It's useful. I integrate it, but for many of our teachers, it's too complicated. And that's even Newsela, which is set to be fairly easy, right? And so, it's pretty straightforward. So the easier or lower touch points that you can get into it is going to be a value add for a lot of people. Or if we're saying, hey, are we going to invest money into this? That will be a legitimate point. Now, if you're saying it's being subsidized by consumers and then the education market gets reduced, that's really a valuable thing, because we could be able to have those conversations. Are you VPAT friendly, et cetera? All those types of things are big deals for us when we make our decisions in terms of purchases. But I'm also wondering, because I'm sorry, like I said, I missed part of that presentation, because you're focusing in on those individual biases and individual things. Did you say that you can isolate individual features on it? So if I just wanted to say, hey, let's only talk about omissions in here, and because when I want to work with my students, can we focus in on individual skills that we're looking at, or is it just the entire product as one?
Yeah, we can do that. So the way we've built it right now, no, but that's quite a simple operation to be able to select a particular annotation or omission type that you want to see, or even just a group of them. It's even something we want to do in the consumer facing app at some stage. We want to let people say, you know what, I really don't care about false dichotomy. Don't show me any of those, right?
Okay.
But yes, to answer your question, that's definitely something we've talked about putting in.
Okay, so I could certainly see the value in that, because building up levels towards a wider literacy there would be something that, it's just kind of the way that people need to present this information instead of just here's everything all at once. Can we get like baby steps as we move into it? I think that would be really valuable and important. And then just my own bias as what I teach my own students is I love the idea. And again, like you said, it might not be possible, but I do love the idea of having international English news sources. So whether that be like something like Japan Times or, you know, whatever it is, like if you have that English version so people can feel represented and get those wider variety of voices, I see that as also really positive. And I know that I'm like in a super liberal, like, you know, community college, all of those types of things, but having that, I feel like there are more people that are open to a wider variety of news sources than in the past, maybe because of the distrust for things. And so, so it's also a possible positive point there, but yeah, I guess those are more comments overall than questions.
I think one of the things that our consumer-facing app will facilitate is exactly that. I mean, if you're in America, it's very easy to see Fox News or CNN. You know, it's in your face all the time. So you'd actually have to make a bit of an effort to go and find those news sources. But our technology will just, if the best article comes from like an English-speaking newspaper in Japan, then that will rise to the top as the top article and be seen, to your point. And also, interestingly, in our research, you know, countries like, I think it was Nigeria, guys, correct me if I'm wrong, their top two news sources, online news sources, were CNN and BBC in Nigeria, which is really interesting. So it's exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, thank you. This is very interesting. I mean, I know it's early days in the conversation, but I certainly see where, oh, and sorry, one last thing to kind of point out, just like the way that some of us run our classes is often in units. And so we do these small units. And so I just want to point out, like, it's also a big buy to get a full on subscription for a 4-week single unit that we're kind of focusing on that individual skill. And so just a consideration, I don't know what that means for you as a business plan overall, but it is something that we go, well, if we're only doing 4 units talking about media literacy and those types of things in my class, right, or in the academic building, the classes that build the academic writing skills, that might, it's just something to be aware of, I guess.
Yeah. So sorry, so just to follow up on that, so you're saying that if you're covering a certain new topic, you have 4 units lasting a total of a month, is that correct?
Sorry, so potentially, and you know, there's academic freedom for professors, so we have choices in terms of how we build our curriculum, but potentially, so for example, my unit last semester that was dealing with digital literacy was a 5-week unit, and then we weren't really touching, I mean, we would come back and talk about those ideas, but we weren't necessarily digging into the same resources at that time after we finished that. And so I guess, you know, it depends on how you're looking at it. With something like Newsela, we can kind of continue to grab resources, but if the goal is only to recognize only, and I mean not trying to belittle the importance of this, but if the goal is only to recognize you know, disparities between different news sources, my class may not need to pursue that the entire time, right? Where it would be 1 month out of a semester that I'm doing that, and then, but am I paying whatever X amount of dollars for an entire year's subscription when we might only really be using those points for 4 weeks or something like that?
Yeah, I understand. And that's where maybe it might only make sense for us to go and approach newsliteracy.org. Or there's a similar program out of Stony Brook University, and they effectively have a whole suite of tools and news literacy education. And I'm not quite sure. I think you can either subscribe to that or just use pieces of it as required. So look, that might actually be the way we go. Or if we just have it online and you can use it as an as needed basis as a temporary subscription model. Again, it's all on the table.
There's tons of potential for it. I can absolutely see integrating into news literacy or Newsela or whoever, like if you said like whatever that ended up being, I could see that. I'm just throwing out our use case.
We are aware of Newsela. I have seen their website and we've had a good look at it. We might be a value add to Newsela, for example. We haven't had a conversation yet. Like, haven't had a conversation with anybody except you guys, as I mentioned earlier. But it's all food for thought. So thank you. Thanks for the ideas.
Wonderful. Craig, Mish, and Steve, thank you very much for sharing your ideas, sharing the presentation, and inviting the conversation. I think that one of the things that we can all see from the level of the questions and the interaction is that a well-structured discussion between educators and edupreneurs allows for some really good exploration. And it's our hope at Next Vista that we will be able to provide more of these over the course of the coming months. Everyone, you are welcome to share your thoughts with us at nextvista.org. You'll see a contact us button in the upper right. Please let us know what you think. We want to be able to make this as useful a series as possible for all concerned. And I want to thank all of the people who've been part of this today. So Darren and Lauren and Jesse and Brent and Bela and Leah and Sheila and Jarrell, thank you for joining in and asking your questions and sharing your ideas. For all of you who are watching this, thank you for taking an interest. We hope we will hear from you, and we will see you again at our next Fascinating Folks series. Thank you.